My father walked my sister down the aisle first. He didn't know it was my wedding. I'm Marin. I'm 34. I'm a structural engineer, which means I spend my life calculating how much weight a thing can carry before it breaks. And the moment I'm about to tell you about, the moment my father lifted the wrong veil in the wrong chapel in front of 300 people, I had already done the math. I knew exactly how much weight my family could hold. I had been the load-bearing wall for 30 years. The cruel part isn't what he did. The cruel part is what he was wearing while he did it. A tie I bought him. A boutonniere my husband picked out. A smile so wide and so wrong I knew, even before he reached for her veil, that whatever he was about to do, he believed he was doing it correctly. He walked Laurel. My younger sister, 29, engaged for 3 weeks, not getting married that day. Down the aisle of the chapel I had spent 18 months rebuilding. He kissed her on the cheek the way fathers kiss brides on television. He turned, beaming, to a room full of people who were watching the wrong daughter receive the wrong moment, and he said, loud enough for the back pew to hear, "A father walks his daughter down the aisle. That's how it's done." 300 guests, 2 veils, 1 father. And me, standing in the side doorway in my actual wedding dress, holding a bouquet I'd picked from my grandmother's garden, watching my father give my sister the moment he had told me. For 9 months of planning, he was too uncomfortable to give to me. I'd spent $18,000 on that wedding. I had personally engineered the building it was happening in. My signature was on the permit that allowed 300 people to stand under that roof. And my father, a man I had loved without question, without measure, without ever once asking what it cost me, walked past the daughter he raised and offered his arm to the daughter he preferred. And what I did next, they didn't expect it. You're on Hidden Family Revenge. If stories about quiet women who finally stop holding the ceiling up are stories you understand, hit subscribe. We have a lot to talk about. Now let me tell you exactly how a wedding becomes the moment a family ends, and the moment one daughter finally begins. Before I tell you about my father, I have to tell you about the Tooth Fairy. I was 9. School picnic at Henley Pond, the one with the wooden footbridge that always smelled like creosote. My front tooth came out in a peach. I remember the peach because I cried about it. Not because the tooth hurt, but because we were 40 minutes from home and the tooth fairy I had explained to my father in great and serious detail came at night to your house where your pillow was. She wouldn't know where to find me at a picnic. My father didn't laugh. He didn't say, "Marin, honey, that's not how it works." He stood up from the picnic table, told my mother he'd be back, drove 40 miles round trip to our house, took the tooth out of my pillow where I'd placed it that morning out of 9-year-old foresight, drove back to the pond and tucked it under the corner of our picnic blanket. "So she can still find you," he said. He sat on a Coleman cooler in 94-degree heat for 2 hours afterward so I wouldn't get worried. He didn't take off his work boots. His shirt was soaked through. He looked at me like I was the only emergency that day. That was my father. That's the man I'm going to tell you about. Or rather, that's the man I have spent 25 years trying to find again in the man who replaced him. I don't know when he changed. I've thought about it. I've laid in bed at 3 in the morning and tried to identify the exact load that fractured him. Because that's how my brain works. I'm an engineer. I look for the failure point. Was it when the mill almost went under in 2011? When my grandfather died and left him the deacon's chair at First Methodist? When Laurel moved back home after her first divorce and he learned how to be useful to a daughter who needed him in a way I never did? I don't know. Buildings rarely fail at one point. They fail along a seam you didn't see. What I know is this. I am 34 years old. I am a structural engineer who specializes in load-bearing retrofits of historic buildings. I am the eldest daughter of Warren and Norma Holloway of Ashford, Virginia, and somewhere between that picnic and my wedding day, I became the daughter who was strong enough to not need anything, which my family eventually translated as the daughter who doesn't need anything. There's a difference. I learned that difference the hard way. I co-signed Laurel's first car at 22. I paid $4,000 toward a plumbing emergency at her apartment when I was 28 that turned out to not be plumbing. It was her tuition for a certificate program she didn't finish. At 31, I paid down 12,000 of my mother's credit cards without telling my father because she asked me not to, and I have wondered, lately, whether keeping that secret made me complicit or just exhausted. There's a difference there too. I'm still figuring it out. And I noticed things. I noticed when my father started introducing me at church events as my daughter, the one who works too much. I noticed when the Christmas card photo 3 years running had Laurel in the middle and me cropped at the elbow. I noticed when my mother set 5 plates at Sunday dinner even when Laurel was traveling, but 4 when I was the one out of town. I noticed all of it. I told myself I was being sensitive. Maybe I was overthinking it. That's the sentence I want you to remember. The one I said to myself for 15 years. Maybe I was overthinking it. There was an envelope, by the way. White, small, sealed. My father handed it to me at my engagement dinner. Theo and I had announced 2 weeks earlier, and he said, in front of my mother and my grandmother and my fiancé, for the wedding, from your mother and me. I took it. I cried, a little, in the way you cry when someone gives you a thing that means they've been thinking about you. 20 minutes later, in the hallway by the bathroom, he asked for it back. He said he'd made a mistake about the amount. He said he'd get me a new one. Hold that envelope in your mind for a minute, I'm going to come back to it. And there's the east beam of the chapel. The one I run my hand along every time I walk into a building I worked on. Engineer's tick, checking your own math. Hold that too. I just wanted my father to walk me down the aisle. That was all. After 30 years of being the one who carried things, I wanted, for one Saturday afternoon, to be carried. It was a Tuesday. February 18th. My mother called at 4:17 in the afternoon, which I remember because I was on a job site in Roanoke and had just signed off on a beam replacement, and the foreman was holding out a pen to me when my phone rang. I told him to hold on. I stepped behind the trailer where the wind couldn't get at the call. Marin, honey, I have to talk to you about something. That was the opening. That was how I knew. There is a specific tone my mother uses when she is about to ask me to absorb something my father has decided. It is high in her throat, slightly breathless, slightly performed. The tone of a woman who has practiced the sentence in front of the bathroom mirror. I heard it. I leaned against the trailer. I watched a strip of yellow caution tape lift and fall in the wind. Your father's been thinking about the wedding, she said. And, honey, you know how he is with crowds, you know how he gets, and he doesn't think he can do the walk. The walk. Like it was a chore. Like it was a length of yard he was being asked to mow. I said, very carefully. And I want you to hear how careful, because careful was the only kind of currency I'd ever been allowed in my family. Mama, what are you saying? He's not going to walk you down the aisle, baby. He can't. He says it'd make him too emotional. He says he wouldn't be able to do it without crying and embarrassing himself. And you know your father. You know he doesn't like to be looked at. I want to tell you what my body did. Not what my mind did. My mind went into engineering mode, which is what it does in failure events. My mind started cataloging. My body went cold in a way I have only ever felt twice before, and both of those times I was at a structural collapse and someone was buried. I said, Mama. He walked Aunt Bess down the aisle at her renewal vows 2 years ago. She had 340 people. Well, that was different. How was it different? Marin, don't be like this. He's your father. There it was. The sentence that had ended every disagreement in our family since I was 12. He's your father. He's your father, so absorb it. He's your father, so be the bigger person. He's your father, so don't ask the question that would make him uncomfortable to answer. I said, okay. I said I understood. I said tell him I love him. I hung up. I signed the beam paperwork with a hand that wasn't shaking. And I want to be clear, my hand was not shaking, because by 34 I had become a woman whose body had been trained not to show anything my family couldn't handle. I drove home. I told Theo. He held me on the kitchen floor for 45 minutes and didn't say a single thing, which is one of the reasons I married him. That was Tuesday. Saturday was the rehearsal dinner. We held it at the back room of Maddox's, which is the Italian restaurant in Ashford where my parents had every anniversary dinner of my childhood. 40 guests. Soft light. My grandmother, Ida May, 81 years old, 4'11", the only person in my family who has ever looked me in the eye without flinching, sat to my right. Theo sat to my left. My father sat at the head of the table because that is where my father sits. Laurel walked in 20 minutes late in a white dress. It was not bridal white, it was that calculated off-white that lets a woman say, when confronted, I would never wear white to your wedding, this is cream. It had a fitted bodice, it had a small train. My best friend Junie, who is the maid of honor and who has known me since we were 8, was sitting across from me, and I watched her face do the entire arc of a sunset in 3 seconds. She mouthed at me, "Oh hell no." I smiled. I stood up. I walked over to my sister. I hugged her. I said, "You look beautiful, Laurel," because here is what they don't teach you about being the load-bearing wall of a family. The wall does not get to react. The wall holds. The wall holds. My father stood up to give a toast. He raised his glass. He looked at the room. He looked at the room. He looked, specifically, past me. And this is the detail I want you to keep, the small, precise cruelty of it, because it was not an accident. My father is not a careless man. He looked past me to Laurel in her white dress, at the table he had reserved, and he said, "A father walks his daughter down the aisle. That's how it's done. And I am so proud, of both of my girls." He toasted Laurel by name. He did not say mine. The room understood it the way rooms understand things, the way a building understands a load shift before any human in it does. There was a small ripple. A glass set down too softly, a cough from the corner. Junie's hand on my wrist under the table, hard. Every part of me wanted to stand up and say his name. I didn't. I lifted my glass. I smiled. I said, "To the room, with a steadiness I will be proud of until the day I die. To family. The kind we're born into, and the kind we build." Theo squeezed my hand under the table so hard I felt the bone of his ring. My grandmother, on my other side, did not lift her glass. She set it down. She turned her face very slowly toward my father. Ida May, 4'11", 81, a woman who had buried a husband and 2 siblings, and held this family together with her bare 2 hands. And she looked at her son the way you look at a building you have decided to condemn. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. For the first time in years, I felt restraint shift weight inside me. It didn't feel like swallowing pain. It felt like a small, cold, useful tool I had just realized I'd been carrying all along. Restraint, I understood right then, was not the absence of power. Restraint was the most concentrated form of it I had ever held. I drove home that night and did not cry. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table with Theo. I said out loud to my husband, with my hands wrapped around a mug that had been a wedding gift to my parents 36 years ago and that I had taken home from one of their moves, "I think I'm going to let him do it." Do what? Walk me down the aisle. I think I'm going to let him try. And I think I already know what he's going to do. I tried, first, to fix it. I want to be honest about that. Because the temptation, when you tell a story like this, is to make yourself the woman who knew, from the beginning, exactly what she was going to do. I didn't. I tried to save my father from himself 3 separate times, and I am telling you that not because it makes me look noble. It doesn't. It makes me look like a fool. But because I want you to understand how slow this kind of decision actually is. Attempt 1. Sunday morning, 2 days after the rehearsal dinner toast. I drove to my parents' house at 8:30 a.m. because I knew my father would be on his second cup of coffee and my mother would be at her women's circle and I would have him alone. He answered the door in his Sunday slacks. He looked surprised. He didn't ask me to come in. I came in anyway. "Dad, we need to talk about the wedding." "Marin, your mother already explained." "I know what she explained. I'm asking you directly to walk me down the aisle on Saturday." He sat down at the kitchen table. He folded his hands. He looked at the wood grain. My father is a man who has, his whole life, made other men in this town feel small without ever raising his voice, and watching him refuse to lift his eyes to mine was the first moment I understood something had gone permanently wrong in him. "Honey, I don't think it's a good idea." "Why?" It's a lot of people. And you know your sister's been having a hard time with the engagement and everything. And it might. Dad, what does Laurel's engagement have to do with whether you walk me down an aisle? He was quiet for a long time. He picked at a chip in the laminate. Then he said something that I have replayed in my head, on a loop, for 9 months. He said, "I just don't think it would look right, the 2 of you. You know how you are. And Laurel, she's the one who's been planning her whole life for a big wedding. I don't want her watching me give it to you first. The 2 of you, you know how you are." I want to tell you what I felt. I didn't feel rage. I felt, instead, a very clean, very quiet recognition, the kind of feeling an engineer gets when she finally identifies the load that brought a structure down. Oh, I thought. So that's what's been wrong for 15 years. He doesn't see two daughters, he sees one daughter and a problem. I drove home. I did not cry. I told Theo. He said very gently, Marin, honey, I think we need to consider not having him in the wedding at all. I said no. Because, and this is the part I'm not proud of, I still believed, on some level, that if I just designed the moment correctly, I could make him be the man from the Tooth Fairy story. I am an engineer. I believed I could engineer my father. Attempt 2. Tuesday. I called him. I said, Dad, I will walk myself down the aisle. You don't have to do anything. Just be in the front row. Be there. That's all I'm asking. He said, I'll think about it. He didn't call back. Attempt 3. Thursday. 2 days before the wedding, I drove to the lumber mill. He was in his office, the small wood-paneled room with the picture of my grandfather on the wall, and the picture of Laurel's first car on the desk, and no picture of me anywhere, which I had never let myself notice before, but which I notice now, the way you notice a missing tooth. I stood in the doorway. I said, Dad, last time, will you walk me down the aisle on Saturday? He looked up. He looked at me for a long moment. And I want to tell you so badly that I saw something soften in him. I want to tell you that the man from the picnic was in there somewhere and I almost found him. He said, Marin, I just don't want to make a scene. That's the sentence. That is the exact sentence. I want you to hold it. Because I'm going to tell you, in a few minutes, exactly what kind of scene my father is willing to make when he believes the scene is for someone he prefers. I drove home. I sat in my truck in my own driveway for an hour. Theo came out at one point with a sandwich and put it on the dashboard and went back inside without saying anything, which is the second reason I married him. That night I made the call I had been avoiding. I called my grandmother. Ida May picked up on the second ring. She always does. She has a flip phone she keeps in the front pocket of her gardening apron, and she answers it like a woman expecting bad news. Grandma, it's me. I know it's you, sweet pea. What's the matter? I told her. All of it. The phone call, the toast, the white dress, the 3 attempts, the lumber mill. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line, the kind of silence I used to be afraid of when I was small but had learned, by 34, to recognize as her thinking. She said, Marin, honey, I want to tell you a story, and then I want to tell you something else. She told me about my grandfather's funeral. 22 years ago, I was 12. I remembered the funeral, but I did not remember what she was about to tell me. She told me that on the morning of the burial, my father, 28 years old, the new head of the family, the man everyone in Ashford was watching, had refused to be a pallbearer. He told her he couldn't do it. He said he'd cry, and he didn't want to be seen crying. Your Uncle Dale carried your grandfather in his place, she said. I never told you that. I never told anyone. Because your father was grieving, and a grieving man gets some grace. But Marin, listen to me. Listen. That was 33 years ago. He has been refusing to carry things for 33 years. He doesn't refuse because he's weak. He refuses because he has decided, somewhere along the way, that carrying is something other people do. And every time we let him refuse, sweet pea, every time I let him refuse, we taught him he was right. She paused. She took a breath the way she does when the next sentence costs her. I'm not going to let him refuse on Saturday. Do you understand me? I said I didn't. She said, you will. Then she said the other thing she'd promised. I gave Laurel my wedding rosary. 3 weeks ago, she asked to borrow it for her engagement photos. I told her she could have it on loan. I want you to know something, Marin. That rosary was promised to you when you were 12 years old. I have known, for 12 years, that it would go to you on your wedding day. I let her take it because I was tired, and I am 81 years old, and I have been tired for 40 years. I am going to get it back. I'm telling you now so you know what's coming. I don't want you to be surprised by anything that happens this week. I drove to her house the next morning, Friday, the day before my wedding, and I sat at her kitchen table and watched her drink coffee out of a mug shaped like a chicken. I asked her, quietly, because I had been quiet my whole life and didn't know any other way to ask hard things, Grandma, what do I do? She set her mug down. She looked at me the way she looks at her tomato plants, which is to say, with the absolute attention of a woman who has decided the thing in front of her matters. She said, Honey, you know what's going to happen Saturday. You knew it before you called me. You've known it for a week. You're not asking me what to do. You're asking me for permission to do it. I started crying. I hadn't cried in 9 days. I cried at my grandmother's kitchen table for 45 minutes and she didn't say anything. She just refilled my coffee and pushed a box of tissues across the table and waited. When I could breathe again, she said, "Marin, I need to ask you a question, and I want you to answer me honest." "Okay. Did you build that chapel?" I stared at her. "What?" "The chapel. Where you're getting married Saturday. The First Methodist Annex. Did you build it?" "Grandma, I didn't build it. 3 years ago I did the structural retrofit. I'm the engineer of record. Without my sign-off the building wouldn't be." "So you built it?" In a manner of speaking. She nodded. She took a slow sip of her coffee. "Honey, did your father know that?" I thought about it. I thought hard. I tried to remember if I'd ever told him. No, I don't think so. I told Mama once. She said it sounded complicated. I don't think she ever told him. He doesn't really ask about my work. Mm-hmm. That was all she said. Mm-hmm. She set her mug down. She looked out her kitchen window at the bird feeder. She said, "Marin, you are walking into a building you built, to be given to a man you chose, by a father who has decided he is too uncomfortable to give you anything. Honey, do you understand what's actually happening on Saturday?" I said no. She said, "You are not asking your father for permission. You are not asking him to be a man he forgot how to be. You are walking into a building that is standing because of you, sweet pea, and you are getting married in it. You don't need him to walk you down an aisle. The aisle is walking you down. Do you hear me?" I didn't then. I do now. I drove home. I sat with Theo. I told him every word she said. He listened. When I finished, he said, very quietly, "Marin, what do you want to do?" I said, "I want to give him one more chance. On Saturday morning. 1. If he reaches for me, I take his arm. If he doesn't—" I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. Junie came over at 9 that night with a bottle of bourbon and a black garment bag. She didn't tell me what was in the bag. She just hung it in the closet and poured 2 glasses and said, "Marin, I have to tell you something and I need you to not be mad." She told me about the program. She had seen the rehearsal program at the chapel that afternoon when she went to drop off the boutonnieres. Laurel's name was listed above mine, as matron of honor. Laurel is not married. There is no matron of honor in my wedding. There never was. My sister had, sometime in the past 9 months while I was paying for the flowers and the food and the music and the building's last walk-through, printed her own name into my wedding. I want to tell you what I felt. I felt nothing. That's the scariest part. I had run out of feeling. I had been spending feeling on this family for 30 years and I was finally out of currency. I said, "Junie, what's in the garment bag?" She said, "It's a backup dress, in case yours gets ruined." I know that's paranoid, but I've known you since we were 8, and I've been watching this family treat you like furniture for 26 years, and I am not going to let you stand in that chapel on Saturday without a backup plan. Is that okay? I said yes. I drank the bourbon. I slept 4 hours. At 3:42 in the morning of my wedding, I woke up in my childhood bedroom. I had stayed there for the night, alone, in the small twin bed with the quilt my grandmother made when I was 6, and I drafted a text to my father. "Dad, just walk me down. Forget all of it, please." I stared at it for 40 minutes. My thumb hovered. I did not send it. At 4:21, my grandmother knocked once on my door and came in without waiting. She sat on the edge of the bed. She was already dressed. She had been awake, I realized, the whole time I had. She said, "Honey, he's not the man you're texting. He hasn't been for a long time. You're not asking your father to walk you down. You're asking a ghost, and ghosts don't have hands." I deleted the text. I got dressed. I drove to the chapel parking lot at 5:47 in the morning. I sat in my truck with a thermos of coffee and a manila folder in the passenger seat. Inside the folder was a recertification form from the venue's management company. They had added a heavy floral arch to the chancel. 800 pounds, suspended from the rafters I had retrofitted. Any structural modification to the load path required the engineer of record to sign off. The engineer of record was me. The form had been sitting on my desk for 2 weeks. The wedding could not proceed without my signature. I held the form in my lap. I watched the sun come up over the chapel I had built. I had a thought. It was a simple thought. I could choose what happens today. For the first time in 30 years, I had a choice that did not include holding anything up. I'm going to tell you what I did. But first, I need to tell you what happened next. Because what happened next was the part that made the choice for me. At 6:14 in the morning, sitting in my truck in the chapel parking lot, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. It said, "Honey, I'm at the chapel early helping Laurel set up her surprise. Don't come in the side door. We're trying to keep it a secret. Use the back." I read it twice, 3 times. Her surprise, Laurel's surprise, at my wedding. I put the phone face down on the dashboard. I did not move for 11 minutes. I want to tell you exactly what I was thinking, and I can't, because what I was thinking wasn't language. It was the sound a building makes right before it doesn't. At 6:25, I got out of the truck. I did not use the back door. I walked in the side door. The door I had specified the dimensions of 3 years earlier when I designed the retrofit, because the original side door had been too narrow for an ADA-compliant ramp. And I stood in the small vestibule and I listened. My mother was in the sanctuary, so was Laurel. So, I could hear, was my father. They were talking about the chairs. "No, Mama, Dad, I told you. The 2 chairs go up front, on either side of the arch. I want a family moment. Before the ceremony, just us. I want the photographer to get a family portrait, with the arch. Before Marin's guests start coming in." My sister wanted a family portrait, at my wedding, with her in the center, under the arch I had certified, before my guests arrived. I want to tell you what I did. I walked into the sanctuary. My mother saw me first. Her face did this small, terrible thing, a flicker of guilt, then a recovery, then a smile too wide. She said, "Marin, honey, you're not supposed to be in here yet." I said, "Mama, why is Laurel here at 6 in the morning?" Laurel turned around. She was in jeans and a sweatshirt. She had her hair in a clip. She looked at me with what I can only describe as the face of a person who has rehearsed her surprise in the mirror. "Marin, don't be mad. I just wanted to do something nice. For you. Daddy and I were going to surprise you with a family arch, for the family portrait, before the ceremony. It's a gift. To you. A gift. To me. Of my own family. At my own wedding. Under an arch I would have had to certify." My father, behind her, did not look at me. He was holding a level. He was checking, I realized, that the chairs were positioned correctly. He had brought a level to my wedding. Before sunrise. To check chairs for a portrait that was a surprise of my family that I had not been told about. I want to tell you what I felt. I felt, and this is the only honest word, clarity. The kind of clarity that does not arrive with a sound. It arrived like a door that had been stuck for 15 years finally clicking open. I said, "Mama, Laurel, Dad, can you all come outside with me for a minute? I want to show you something." We walked outside, the 4 of us. My grandmother was just pulling into the parking lot in her old Buick. I waved her over. She got out slowly, 81, in a navy dress, her hair set, and she walked over and stood beside me. She didn't ask what was happening. She didn't need to. I held up the manila folder. I opened it. I took out the recertification form. I held it up. "This," I said, "is a recertification form from the management company that owns this chapel. The arch you've installed, the one you bought as a surprise, modifies the structural load path of the building. Any load modification has to be certified by the engineer of record. The engineer of record is the structural engineer who supervised the retrofit 3 years ago. Without this signature, the wedding cannot legally proceed." My mother said, "Marin, what are you?" I said, "Mama. The engineer of record is me." The silence that followed is the silence I want you to hold. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, my mother understood, then my sister understood, then my father. Slowest, last, as always, understood. My father said, "Marin." "What?" I said, "I am the structural engineer of this building, Dad. I have been for 3 years. My signature is on the occupancy permit. Without my signature on this form," I held it up again, "the chapel cannot host a wedding today. Yours, Laurel, mine, anyone's. The doors don't open." My sister's face went the color of the sky before a storm. My mother put a hand on her own throat. My father set down the level. He said, "And this is the sentence I want you to keep, because it tells you everything about who my father had become." He said, "Marin, honey, don't do this. Don't make a scene." There it was again. Don't make a scene. The exact words he'd used at the lumber mill on Thursday. The same words he had used in some version for 15 years every time I had asked him to see me. I looked at him. I looked at him the way you look at a building you have decided is no longer safe. I said, Dad, I'm not making a scene. I'm asking a question. Who is getting married in this chapel today? He said, You are. I said, Then why is Laurel's family portrait happening before my guests arrive, under an arch I am being asked to certify, in a building I designed, while you, Dad, have spent 2 weeks telling me you can't walk me down an aisle because crowds make you uncomfortable? Can you answer that question? He couldn't. I watched him not be able to. I watched his mouth open and close. I watched his hand reach for the level on the chair beside him and then stop, because there was nothing on the level to check. My mother said, Marin, sweetheart, your sister was just trying to. My grandmother spoke, for the first time. Her voice was small and clear, like a glass set down on slate. Norma, be quiet. My mother stopped talking. My grandmother said, Warren, look at your daughter. Both of them, look at them. And tell me, son, in front of God and this parking lot, which one of them is getting married today? My father looked at his shoes. She said, Look up, Warren. He looked up, he looked at me, he looked at Laurel, he looked back at me. He said very quietly, and I want to tell you, in this moment, I almost forgave him. In this moment, I almost saw a flicker of the man from the picnic. He said, Marin is. My grandmother said, Then act like it. Or get in your truck and go home. There is no third option, son. There has not been a third option for a very long time, and I should have told you that 30 years ago. I'm telling you now. She turned to me. She said, Sweet pea, sign the form or don't, it's yours to sign. But know that whatever you decide, I am standing beside you. And if your father walks you down the aisle today, he walks you down because he chose to, not because you begged him to. And if he doesn't, I will. I want to tell you what I felt. I felt, for the first time in 30 years, held. I looked at my father. I held the form. I said, Dad, I'm going to sign this form. The wedding is going to happen. My wedding. Not Laurel's surprise. Not a family portrait. My wedding. And you have one chance, one, to walk me down the aisle. Not because I'm asking. Not because you owe me. Because you're my father, and you remember, somewhere in there, the man who drove 40 miles for a baby tooth. If that man is in there, Dad, this is when he shows up. And if he isn't, Grandma walks me down. My father stared at me. His face did something I had not seen it do in 15 years. It cracked. Just for a second, a small fissure around the eyes that I might have imagined. He said, Marin, He didn't finish. I waited. The silence stretched. The sun came over the roof of the chapel. He said, Okay. That was all. Okay. Not, I will. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I love you. Just, okay. I signed the form. I handed it to my mother. I said, Mama, take this to the venue manager. He'll be here at 7. The arch stays. Laurel's surprise portrait does not. We're not doing a family portrait at 6:30 a.m. at my wedding. You can have one at the reception with the rest of the family pictures. That's the compromise. Take it or don't. My mother took the form. She did not look at me. She walked into the chapel. Laurel said, Marin, you're being. I said, Laurel. Not today. Today you are a guest at my wedding. We can talk about the rest of it next month. Or next year. Or never. I am not interested in your apology right now. I am not interested in your version. I am getting married in 3 hours, and you are wearing the dress you brought, and you are sitting in the third pew. Are we clear? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She walked away. My grandmother put her hand on my arm. She said, Sweet pea, look at me. I looked at her. She said, He said okay. That isn't a promise. That's a man hoping he can still get away with the smallest possible amount of effort. You understand me? I said yes. She said, Have a backup. Always have a backup. I'm walking in beside you anyway. He gets one chance. If he hesitates, even for a half second, you take my arm and you keep walking. Do you hear me? I said yes. She said, Now, there's one more thing. She reached into her purse, a black leather purse she had carried since 1978, and she pulled out a small velvet pouch. She handed it to me. I opened it. The rosary. Her wedding rosary. The one she had promised me when I was 12. The one she had let Laurel borrow 3 weeks ago. I said, Grandma, how? She said, I drove over to your sister's house Wednesday night. I knocked on the door. I asked for it back. She said no, at first. I told her I was 81 years old and I had spent 40 years being polite about being lied to, and I had run out of patience the way I run out of patience for tomato hornworms, completely and without warning. She gave it back. I started to cry. She said, "Don't cry yet, sweet pea, you've got 3 hours. Save it for the part where you walk." She pressed the rosary into my palm. She said, "I wore this when I married your grandfather in 1962. He held my hand the whole walk. 48 years, never let go, not once. I want you to know, whatever happens in this chapel today, whatever your father does or doesn't do, you are loved. 48 years worth. I am old, Marin, I am tired, but I am here. Do you hear me?" I heard her. I heard her so hard I thought my ribs were going to crack. "I want to tell you about the next 3 hours. I won't. Some of it is mine. I will tell you this. I stood in the bride's room. I put on my dress. Junie did my hair. My mother came in at one point, silent, contrite, smaller than I had ever seen her, and offered to help with my veil. I let her. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say that we could say yet. At 10:00 a.m., the doors of the chapel opened. 300 guests were inside. I stood in the side vestibule. My grandmother was on my right. Theo's mother, a woman I love, was at the back of the chapel waiting for her cue. The processional music began. I looked through the doorway. I saw my father standing at the front of the chapel. He was supposed to be at the back. He was supposed to be at the back, waiting for me, to walk me down. He had been told. He had been told 3 times by the wedding coordinator. He had been told by Theo. He had been told by my grandmother. He was at the front, standing next to the officiant, smiling, holding the arm of my sister Laurel in her cream off-white dress, having just walked her down the aisle to the front of the chapel for the family portrait he had been told was cancelled. He had walked her down. Anyway, while I was getting dressed, before the ceremony, in front of the guests who had begun arriving early and were now seated, he had walked my sister down the aisle of my wedding, at my chapel, before me. He didn't know. He didn't know that the chapel doors had opened for the actual processional. He thought it was still a private family moment. He had not bothered to check. He had not even looked at the time. I watched him. I watched him from the side doorway in my actual wedding dress with my grandmother on my arm. I watched him turn toward Laurel, lift the front of her hair. Not a veil, she didn't have a veil, she had a clip, but he reached for it the way men reach for veils, and kiss her on the cheek. And I watched him say, loud enough for the entire seated congregation to hear, "A father walks his daughter down the aisle. That's how it's done." I want to tell you what happened in the room. The room, 300 guests, half of them mine, half of them his, went silent. Not the silence of confusion, the silence of recognition, the silence of a room full of people understanding, all at once, what kind of man had just walked the wrong daughter down the wrong aisle of the wrong wedding. My father turned. He saw me. He saw me in the side doorway, in my white dress, with my grandmother on my arm, in a building I had built. His face, and I will carry this with me for the rest of my life, did not show shock. It did not show shame. It showed, for one terrible second, a kind of small calculation. The face of a man trying to figure out how to make this be okay. The officiant, Pastor Earl, looked at my father, then at me, then back at my father. Then he said, "And I love this man. I have loved this man since I was 14 years old in his Sunday school class." And he said this. He said, "Warren, a father walks his daughter down the aisle. That's how it's done." He said it back to him. The exact sentence. Returned to my father like a borrowed tool. My father did not move. The silence held. My grandmother, 4'11", in a navy dress, 81 years old, patted my hand on her arm and said, in a voice that did not carry but did not have to, "Sweet pea, let's walk." And we did. I ran my hand along the east beam as we crossed the threshold of the chapel. Engineer's tick. Checking my own work. The beam was warm from the morning sun. The building held. I held. 300 faces turned toward me. I want to tell you what I saw. I saw Theo at the front, his face wet, his hand at his mouth. I saw Junie in the first pew on my side, holding a tissue she was not using because she was using her sleeve. I saw Theo's mother, who I love, mouthing something to me I couldn't read and didn't need to. I saw my mother in the second pew, head down, hands folded in her lap. I saw Laurel. And I want to be specific about this because this is the detail I want you to hold. Laurel was no longer at the front. She had been removed. By whom, I don't know. By my grandmother's earlier words, maybe. By the silence of the room. By Pastor Earl. She was in the third pew, where I had told her to sit. She was looking at the floor. I saw my father. He was still at the front. He had not moved. He had not crossed back to the rear of the chapel to take my arm. He could not. He had walked the wrong daughter down the aisle, and the aisle had been used up. There was no walk left. My grandmother walked me down the whole length of the aisle. She did not look at my father. She did not look at my sister. She looked at Theo. She walked her granddaughter to the man she had chosen. When we reached the front, she stopped. Pastor Earl asked the traditional question, "Who gives this woman to be married?" And my grandmother said in her small, clear voice, "I do. On behalf of everyone in her life who has ever asked her to carry something heavy, I do." She put my hand in Theo's. She kissed my cheek. She turned. She walked back to her seat. She did not look at her son on the way. My father stood there. The whole ceremony. He had nowhere to go. Leaving would have made it worse, so he stood at the front, off to the side, holding nothing. I will tell you something that I am not proud of. I did not look at him. I did not look at him once for the entirety of the ceremony. Not because I was performing, because I had run out of looks. After the vows. After the rings. After Pastor Earl said husband and wife and Theo kissed me and the room, and I want you to understand, the room had been holding its breath for 40 minutes. The room exhaled in a single sound that I will hear in my dreams for the rest of my life. It was not applause. It was something older than applause. It was relief. We turned. We walked back down the aisle. Together. My husband and I. Past my father, who did not lift his head. Past my mother, who finally did. Past my sister, who did not. We went into the side vestibule. Theo held me. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The receiving line was short. It was supposed to include my parents. It did not. My mother came to the line for 30 seconds and then went to find my father, who had walked out the back of the chapel and was, my cousin Jonah later told me, sitting in his truck in the parking lot. Laurel did not come to the line at all. My grandmother stood in the line with me and Theo for 90 minutes. She shook every hand. She smiled at every guest. She did not sit down once. The reception was at the Holloway farm, my parents' farm, which they had insisted on hosting. And I will tell you what I expected. I expected them to skip it. I expected the chairs to be empty at the head table. I expected the toasts to be hollow. They came. Both of them. My father changed his suit jacket. I learned later that he had vomited in the parking lot of the chapel, and they came. My mother sat in her chair at the head table and did not eat. My father sat in his chair and did not eat. Laurel did not come. She had driven home from the chapel. She would not speak to me for 4 months. At the reception, 3 things happened that I want to tell you about. The first. My grandmother gave a toast. It was short. She held a champagne glass that was filled with sparkling cider because she had not drunk alcohol since her husband died, and she stood up and she said, "To Maren, who has carried this family for 30 years. Today she set it down. About time." She drank. She sat. She did not look at my father. The room, our half of it mostly, did not know what to do. Theo's father laughed once, low, a real laugh that broke something open. The toast went into the family's mythology, where it remains. The second. Pastor Earl came up to me, between the dinner and the dancing. He pulled me aside. He said, "Maren, I have known your father since 1971. I want you to know something. What he did this morning, that was not a confusion. That was a choice he had made about you. I am not going to pretend it was anything else. And I am sorry that he made it, and I am proud of you for standing up anyway. Your grandfather, God rest him, would be proud of you. Your grandmother is proud of you. I am proud of you. And I want you to know that this morning, when I spoke to your father in the chapel, when I said his own line back to him, I did that on purpose. I wanted him to hear it. I don't know if he did, but I tried. I hugged him. I have known this man since I was 14. He held me for a moment. He went back to his table. The third. My mother. Sometime around 9:30 in the evening, after the cake and before the last dance, she came to find me. I was on the back porch of the farmhouse with Theo, just breathing. She came out alone. She stood at the door. She said, "Maren, honey, can I sit with you a minute?" I said yes. She sat. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, I have been a coward for 30 years. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not asking you to do anything. I wanted you to know that I know. I have known. I have known since you were 9. Your father is not the man I married, and I have spent my whole marriage pretending he is. I am so sorry, baby. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. She cried, quietly, with her hands in her lap, the way she has always cried. She did not ask for forgiveness. That is what I want you to hear. She did not ask, she just said it 3 times. I'm so sorry. And then she got up, and she went back inside. I sat with Theo for a long time after that. I did not cry. I had not cried, in fact, since my grandmother's kitchen table on Friday morning. I think I was full. I think there wasn't any more room. I will tell you one last thing about the climax, the part most people don't get to see, after the reception. After the last guest. After Theo and I had said goodbye to my grandmother and gotten in the truck. I was alone, for 1 minute, walking from the farmhouse to the truck when I saw my father. He was in the side hallway of the farmhouse, the one off the kitchen. He was holding his suit jacket, he had taken it off, and he was standing there, in the hallway, not moving. He didn't see me at first, he was just standing there, holding his jacket, as if waiting for someone to tell him what to do with it. He looked, in that second, exactly like my father from the picnic, the man on the cooler in the heat, tired, useful, trying. I almost went to him. I didn't. I want you to know I didn't. I turned. I walked out the side door. I got in the truck. Theo drove us home. But I want to tell you the truth. I almost did. The cost of not going was the highest price I have ever paid. I'm going to tell you what happened in the 9 months since. My mother and I talk now. Not often. Once every 3 or 4 weeks. We have lunch at a diner halfway between our houses, neutral ground, neither her kitchen nor mine, and we are slowly, carefully learning how to be 2 adult women who happen to share 34 years of history. She has started therapy. She told me last month she wishes she had started in 1991. I told her I wished she had too. We held that sentence between us for a minute, then we ordered pie. Laurel and I do not talk. She did not reach out for 4 months. When she did, it was a long email full of explanations and accusations and the words we just thought, which is the phrase she has used my entire life to mean I decided. I read the email once. I did not reply. I am not angry at her. I am not finished either. We may speak again, we may not. I am no longer interested in being the one who decides whether the relationship continues. That ball is in her court. It has been in her court for 9 months. So far, she has not picked it up. That tells me what I need to know. My grandmother is 82 now. She is slower than she was. She is, in every other way, exactly the same. She comes for Sunday dinner once a month. Theo cooks. She tells me about her tomatoes. Last month she said to me, over coffee, "Sweet pea, I have one regret in my life. I did not tell you, at 12, what kind of man your father was becoming. I should have. I let you find out the hard way. I'm sorry." I told her she did the best she could. She said, "Honey, that's the sentence I want you to stop using about people. Sometimes the best they could is not enough, and it's okay to say that out loud." I am writing it down. The chapel still stands. I drove out there last week, alone, at sunset, the way I sometimes do, and I walked in through the side door and I ran my hand along the east beam. The building was empty. The light was orange. It hummed the way buildings hum when no one is in them. I am the only person who can hear it. And I stood there, in the chapel I had built, in the building that had held my wedding, and I let myself feel, for the first time, fully, what I had carried for 30 years. I had spent 30 years holding up a family that never once asked what I weighed. That is the sentence. That is what I learned. Not about him. About me. I had let myself be the load-bearing wall because I was strong enough to be one, and I had confused strength with obligation, and I had taught my family, by carrying everything, that I would always carry everything. And the moment I stopped, the moment, in that parking lot at 6:14 in the morning, that I picked up a manila folder and asked a question my father could not answer, was the moment I learned that strength is not the same thing as availability. You are allowed to be strong and unavailable. You are allowed to be capable and absent. You are allowed to put the building down. About the envelope. I have to tell you about the envelope. 3 weeks after the wedding, I came home from work and there was a small white envelope on my front porch. No name, no stamp. Just the envelope, set carefully beside my coffee cup from that morning, which I had forgotten on the porch railing. On the front, in my father's handwriting, the same handwriting from the picnic, from the birthday cards, from the lumberyard receipts, it said, "I'm sorry I forgot where to find you. I did not open it for 3 weeks. I was afraid of what was inside. I was afraid there would be money in it, and that the money would mean he thought money was the answer. I was afraid there would be a long letter in it, and that the letter would ask me to absorb his feelings. I was afraid there would be a card in it that said Dad in pre-printed letters, and that I would have to feel something about a card." When I finally opened it, 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, alone at my kitchen table, with Theo asleep upstairs, the envelope was empty. Empty. Nothing inside. I sat with that for a long time. I cried, finally. For the first time since my grandmother's kitchen, for 45 minutes. Because I understood, sitting there, what the empty envelope meant. It meant my father had wanted to write something, and he had not known what to write, and he had sent the envelope anyway, because he did not have words for what he had done. Because the man who once drove 40 miles to find a missing daughter had become a man who, 35 years later, did not know where to start. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I have not spoken to him. I have not written back. I do not know if I will. The envelope sits in the top drawer of my desk. Some days I think I will write him back. Some days I am not ready. Some days I think the appropriate response to an empty envelope is an empty envelope, sent back. Some days I think the appropriate response is to walk back into my parents' kitchen and pour 2 cups of coffee and ask him to tell me about the day my front tooth came out. I have not decided. I am allowed to not decide. That is the freedom my grandmother gave me at her kitchen table when she told me I was not asking her what to do. I was asking her for permission to know what I already knew. The door is open 1 inch, not wide enough to walk through, not locked. The condition, if he ever does walk through, is not 1 sentence. It is 10 years of behavior. He is 63, he may not have 10 years. That is the math we are both doing. I think he is doing it too. I think the empty envelope was the first draft of 10 years he did not know how to start. We will see. I used to think that being the strongest person in a family was a kind of love. Now I know it was a kind of hiding. I was hiding inside my own usefulness, and the day I stopped being useful, the day I sat in a parking lot and held a folder and asked one question my father could not answer, was the day I became findable to myself. If you are watching this and you have been the load-bearing wall of your family for as long as you can remember, if you are the one who pays for the plumbing emergency that isn't a plumbing emergency, who keeps the secret, who shows up early, who carries the building, I want you to hear me. You are allowed to put the building down. The building will stand or it won't. That is not your math anymore. I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me below, because I genuinely don't know. Would you have signed the form or let the wedding fall apart on its own? I still don't know if I made the right call. Some days I am proud of signing it. Some days I think I should have let the whole thing collapse and walked into the parking lot and gone home. Some days I think I gave him one more chance than he had earned. Tell me below. I want to know what you would have done. Because I am still, 9 months later, in a marriage I love, in a life I built, in a body I am finally learning how to inhabit. I am still asking that question. If you've ever stood in a building you built and watched the people you love forget you built it, this comment section is for you. Tell me your version. I will read everyone. I'm Marin. The chapel still stands, so do I.